Crime is everywhere and consistently on the rise. Quick and easy cases are solved daily, but what of those other cases? The ones that have gone cold with no new leads or information. The famous serial killers have been captured and made public. But what of those still on the loose? Or even worse, still killing? Welcome to the realm of darkness. Your host, Reeni and Ashley, will be your guides into the mysterious world of true crime cases and stories. Here are your hosts, Reeni and Ashley.
Hey everyone, welcome to Realm of Darkness. I'm Reeni, and we all know the lovely Ashley. Today we have a guest, Bruce Most. He is an author of non-fiction books. Okay, what was it? Fiction.
He's an author of fictional crime books.
Okay, that was my fault. Ashley had to remind me earlier today because I had to Google it as well. Oops, my bad. So we will welcome Bruce to the show.
Hi there.
How are
Hello,
you?
Bruce. How are you?
Hi, Reeni. Nice to meet you, Ashley.
Nice to meet you.
I'm trying to get, it's late afternoon sun here in Denver, and I've got sunspots through my window here. I can't get them off my face, but you'll have to live with it for a little bit.
I'm jealous. It's rainy here, so.
Oh, it is?
It is.
Are you in Illinois too, Ashley?
No, I'm in Ohio.
Oh, you're in Ohio.
Yeah, so our weather's
in
more.
In Illinois. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
So why don't you give us a little bit of information on your books? Like, we'll kind of just start there.
Okay. Actually, let me preface this a little bit before I talk about the books. When you first asked me about doing the show, and of course I know you have your audience is true crime fans, and that's what you discuss on your podcast. So I was thinking, okay, I'm a crime fiction writer, so how does that mesh together with your audience? And so I started thinking about the fact that really a lot of crime novels and short stories and screen work, like some of my own, draw from nonfiction true crime events. So I was going to mention a few of the really well-known ones, and then I can get in and talk about some of my own books if that's okay. I figured this goes back to Edgar Allan Poe. One of his works drew on an actual murder case back in the 1800s. I don't know what year. And of course, anybody who's familiar with Murder on the Orient Express, both Agatha Christie's book, and there's been countless movies, that drew on the Lindbergh kidnapping case. That's where she got a lot of her idea for that particular story. Are you familiar with the famous Black Dahlia case, the murder case in Los Angeles?
Yep.
Back in I'm trying to remember what year, 1947, I think, which again was a real case, Elizabeth Short, whose body was found in a field, famously cut in half, and to be gross about it, drained of blood.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that's prompted numerous books, the most famous of called The Black Dahlia by James Ellroy, which it's a fantastic book if you get a chance to read that. Silence of the Lambs, the book and the movie. Harris actually talked to, he was a serial killer. He was a surgeon who was in prison, and he by chance met him and talked with him, and that inspired the major portion of his plot. And the last one that came to mind, and I happen to be reading a book about it called the Chinatown. You remember the movie Chinatown, which is from the early 70s. You both look fairly young. You might not have seen it.
I've heard of it.
Yes.
if you have not seen it, it's a fantastic movie. One of the early great roles for Jack Nicholson, but I think one of the best crime movies ever made. And it's the screenplay writer drew on the actual events of a battle over water rights between Los Angeles and Owens Valley, which is farther up California. And so, we as fiction writers often get ideas. We may change them dramatically, but we still get a lot of ideas from real events and real criminals. And so some of my own books are based on ideas that I've gotten. So I'll talk about a couple of them. Let me see, I have a couple of books here on my side. So this, I guess you can kind of see. So this is my first actual, here we go, published book called Bonded for Murder, which is about a woman bail bond agent here in Denver. And when I got the idea, like a lot of things, you draw on numerous sources, but the core of the plot is based on an actual murder case. There was in 1984, I think it was, something like that. There was the murder of a man named Alan Berg. Again, probably you would have been maybe a little too young, but it was a famous case. He was a radio host here in Denver, and he was a very liberal, Jewish, and was kind of an early shock jock. He was quite controversial on the air, and a white Christian or supremacist group, the Order, from, I think they were based in Utah or Montana, I forget which state. They had decided they were going to assassinate numerous people, and he was the first one. I think he was really the only one they successfully did. He was gunned down getting out of his car at his condo. And so I was aware of the case. I actually was living in Denver at the time, and I still do. And so that kind of stuck in the back of my mind. So when I started this book, I drew on that plot. I mean, I have a lot of other things that go on in the book, but the core of that book started with that idea. So that was, one of the things that I drew from a real event, and took it from there. And like many fiction writers, we elaborate and make twists on what really went on. But that was the genesis of that particular novel. And the other one I'll particularly mention, this was actually my last. I'm trying to find myself in the called The Big Dive. This was the last book, my most recent book, and it's about a Denver street cop. I had written one book before about him, set in 1949. This is set in 1951, and when I started thinking about it, well, okay, I've done this one book about him. What would be another plot? I was aware of somewhere along the way, I found out about there was a big police scandal in the city of Denver. It broke in 1961, and pretty much all of it broke like New Year's Day, and by the end of that year, they had arrested something like 50 some Denver cops, some law enforcement people from loosely connected to them, like connected to the sheriff's department. But most of it was focused on Denver police, and they would burglarize. They would get to know a store owner. If that was part of their beat. They'd find out where the safe was and access to the place, and then they would break in at night and steal a safe. Or they would, if somebody actually broke into the place, a quote real civilian thief, they might show up at the crime scene and haul off a bunch of stuff themselves and throw it in the car. So it was literally, I think, probably several gangs of police who did this over many years. And so when I got this idea for the story, which is set in 1951, I backed it up 10 years, but they had been going on for several years. But the story didn't break until 1961. And in fact, it was so big, I dug this up when I was doing my research. This is a Life magazine article from, let's see, what's the date on this? I forget. November 3rd, 1961. And of course, when you're doing stories like this, I was doing a lot of research about how they committed their crimes, how did they crack into a safe. I had to figure that out for a scene. And so they had an article about it. It was an excellent article with a lot of interesting things that I picked up from that in my research, including the title of the book. And it even made, I think, some international news, but it was like the biggest police scandal of its sort at that time. Eventually superseded Los Angeles and New York City have had, much bigger police scandals, but it was a big scandal in its day. So that was one of the key plot elements that I used to develop my story. And I also combined it with another issue that some people would definitely call a crime, and that was the imprisonment of Japanese Americans in World War II in what some people call, and I happen to agree, concentration camps. There were 10, they called them relocation camps, but there were 10 camps scattered around, most of them out west, because they moved all the Japanese off of the citizens off of the West Coast. And Colorado had a camp. I think it was the smallest of the 10 camps, but it was in a corner, pretty barren corner of Colorado. So I drew on that and combined it with the police scandal to create my plot. So we as fiction writers frequently draw on these real crime events for ideas, and as I say, we may change them. The Dirty Cops, there was a lot that I used from that. I mean, there's a lot of what goes on in my book really reflected what they were doing at the time. So
how much research? I knew it was going to happen.
We always do that. Reenie, you can go first. Go ahead.
Like, how much time do you actually spend researching, like the book about Dirty Cops, like the Big Dive? Like, how much time did you spend researching those cops, or was it just kind of something like, oh, I read a couple articles and I?
Oh no, it's much more than a couple of articles. I mean, you dig up old news. I went hunting for old newspaper articles. There was actually there was a book. There was a book written that came out. It was several years ago as an ebook that was published by one of the most well-known Dirty Cops. And so he wrote about his own. So I got that book because he had some wonderful detail in there. Because you see, I have a scene where we're seeing these cops get into a safe. Well, they used special saws and that sort of thing. And, I didn't know that off the top of my head. So when I came across this book, it was just all kinds of great material, specific details. But I had already dug around, and you find a lot of stuff in the Denver Post and the Rocky Mountain News had all written articles about that. The Life magazine, a certain amount of stuff on the internet that you draw on. So you spend hours and hours doing that kind of thing. One of the problems for most of us writers, especially if there's a book that's very involved with research, historical, or whatever topic you're doing, it's not spending too much time doing research. But the more stuff you have, and especially you're looking for key little details, and it makes the story feel real. So yeah, it's not just I read a couple of articles and that's all I need. So no, it was a lot more. And of course, the same thing went on with the Japanese American camps. I also read quite a bit about those.
So when you're getting ready to write a new book or trying to gather ideas for a new book, is there certain criteria that you look for in crimes that you think would make a good story and kind of like capture your well, I say listener, but your reader?
That's kind of I don't have, I guess I don't have criteria per se. A lot of writing like that it's just sort of instinct. I mean, you come across this stuff and you think, oh, that would make a good story. Sometimes it doesn't, but and of course it's something that fits what you're writing, your style of writing, and the kinds of things you like to tackle. I mean, there are I write what I would call, I guess a very general term is sort of hard-boiled books, meaning they're not cozies, which are typically but not always written by women, where the crime is off stage. Kind of the Agatha. If you've read any of Agatha Christie's books, Miss Marple was one of the great original cozy series of books, and so the crimes are kind of committed off stage. The language is not very harsh. I'm dealing with cops and that sort of thing, so the language is pretty hard. I'm not one who likes to show a lot of sort of gross bodies and violence, but I do have crime scenes, and you do describe those events. So it's kind of a little harder edge. So when I find stories, I'm looking for something like that. I'm not looking for something a little lightweight. I'm not looking for something at the other end, really dark noir, for example. And be honest, it's just kind of what you find and feel. I mentioned the Bonded for Murder book about a woman bail bond agent. Not the plot, but her character came from, I was reading a local, not the Denver Post or any of those, but it was a more local newspaper here in Denver, and they had a profile of a woman bail bond agent. Now, that's a business that is mostly men.
Yeah.
But this was a woman who's she'd worked with her husband, and her husband, if I recall right, it's been years since I read it. I believe her husband was murdered and she took over the business, which is exactly what I did with my character. I wasn't looking for that per se. I just read the article and I thought, oh, this would really be, because she was a woman, and I'd like to find some of my books are people who are not, they're not private eyes, and they're not necessarily cops. So two of the books I referenced are an actual cop, but they're what we would call amateur cops. Well, I'm always looking for a reason. Why would they be involved in investigating a murder or a series of murders? So that also tends to steer me to certain characters and maybe to certain situations. So when I read that article about her, I thought, oh God, this is really interesting. And a lot of people have really liked her as a character. I made her pretty strong, a woman of 50 who's pretty hard-nosed, and she was a lot of fun to write. My son will hate me for saying this, but to this day, I wrote this book many years ago, and in the course of while I was working on it, the family sitting here at the dinner table, and I was probably, I don't know what I was saying exactly, but I was talking about working on the book. And he said, Dad, you talk about her like she's a real person. And she was to me. I mean, you just get caught up. So I know that's kind of a vague answer, Ashley, to your question. I don't have a list of things. You just kind of feel like, oh, that's interesting. And you get, as a writer, most writers get a lot of ideas, most of which we neither have time or, gee, that sounds great the first time around. You think about it, but later on it doesn't. You think, oh, this is not going to work out. Or sometimes you start something and it just doesn't pan out. It's more of a gut feeling, I guess, to use that phrase. So.
Well, we're going to take a really quick break because I didn't get the 5-minute mark, but I did take a break when you're ready. So we're going to take a really quick break.
Yell, I need to stop.
No, you're fine. It was me this time.
DeEtte Renee, Psychic Medium. All of us have questions about our lives, our loved ones, our futures. DeEtte Renee is here to help answer those difficult questions. DeEtte excels at working with spirit and is a certified psychic medium through LWISSD. She is a master teacher and well-versed in the spirit world. Look, don't trust just any psychic with your deepest thoughts and worries. Trust DeEtte Renee, as she will deliver her very best for you. General readings, past loved ones, finances, your future. Contact DeEtte now on her website, DeEtteRenee.com. That's DeEtteRenee.com.
Welcome back to welcome back. We are talking with Bruce Most. He, wrote some books, and he was kind of giving us how he writes his books. So we want to. I know I can't remember where we left off. I know we were talking about Ashley's question, but
yes. So I do have a question.
Yeah, I knew she was going to after every.
So I of course love anything true crime, fictional. I love all that stuff. So when I was doing research, because I also research our guests, I saw that you had written so many books. And is there one book that you favor over the others? Like if someone was online and came across your series, would there be one book that you would refer them to start with?
Well, that's always a tough question. And one of the challenges for myself as a writer is I don't have a single series, with
Right.
5 or 6 books with. So I really have 2 of the books, the 1949, 1951. I have 2 books of that. And I have two books with the woman bail bond agent, and then I have a standalone called Rope Burn, which I may have occasion to talk about a little bit too, about cattle rustling and murder in contemporary Wyoming. There is cattle rustling going on in the West even today. Anyway, I do get asked that question, and I couldn't put my finger on a single book. Maybe I'm cheating the answer, but I will say this: each book has its. I mentioned the bail bond agent, Ruby Dark, which is her name.
Mm-hmm.
I think in some ways she's my favorite character. I've just really enjoyed writing her, and people seem to like her, and she works with a young nephew who's going through law school. So we kind of see the book through his eyes, and he's not that familiar with the bail bond business, so we can kind of educate the reader through his eyes. But she's my favorite character of the books. My Joe Stryker book, which is the street cop in Denver, he's a little harder and rougher around the edges. I enjoy writing all these characters. I'm not putting that down. I think The Big Dive, which is the second of the 2 Joe Stryker books, is my best plotted book. I really found it fascinating to get into the dirty cops and especially the Japanese American relocation camps, which of course I knew about, but when you start to research it, it's just really heartbreaking in a lot of ways what went on. So, and from the plot standpoint, I think that's kind of my best book from that standpoint. The other book I'll just mention briefly here, called Rope Burn, which is set in contemporary Wyoming about cattle rustling. And quick summary for those who wouldn't be familiar with it at all. it's a story about a man who was a former detective in Baltimore, and he's got a past that he's finally leaving. He's gotten divorced. He's had a kind of a scandal in Baltimore when he was a cop, and so he's left. He's just left, and he's on the road driving around the country, and he ends up in Wyoming. And I'm go through, of course, all the details of how he gets hired for a variety of reasons to become a stock detective, which are the people who go out, and if there's a lot of rustling around, there's not a lot of stock detectives around, but they are people who try to catch cattle thieves. And of course, he's ridden mounted patrol in his early days, so he knows how to be on a horse. But other than that, the only thing he knows about cattle is to eat a steak. I mean, he doesn't know anything about cattle ranching or any of that. So he's a fish out of water, which I had a lot of fun with because it allowed me to play with that. And it was also personally a lot of fun because I have in-laws who live in ranch country in southeast Wyoming, which is where I set the book. I changed all the various names and location names and that sort of thing. But I've been up there many times. I've been to brandings, and so it was. And I was a freelance writer most of my career, or all my career, and I actually wrote a couple of articles about cattle rustling. And so I thought, well, this is perfect. I know something. I'm terrible on a horse, but I do know something about cattle ranching. And so I got fascinated with doing a book about that. And some people really enjoy that and think I did a good job of capturing what it is like to do that. And of course, the people I know have not had directly cattle rustling, and they've certainly not had any murders, but that's what we fiction writers do, is to add those things. So that book was a lot of fun for me to write. I wish I could say, I point you to, but I described all those. So, your listeners may go, I like that type of book, or that character sounds interesting, or that plot sounds interesting. So, I leave it up to them as to what sounds most intriguing.
I know Nicole Strickland said, I love Bruce's book covers.
Oh, yeah?
Yes. Of course, Nicole would.
Well, I have to throw this in since I have a cartoon about this too. But, so this is the book this was one that I had published through a small publisher. And to be honest, some people like this cover. I don't, for a variety of reasons. I won't belabor it. And I recently,
I like it.
You too.
I tried to get him to do another cover, and I didn't do this in advance. So I redid the cover. It's actually hangman's noose over a pickup truck, which would convey that it's a modern thing. And then you can see cattle in the background. And that's what I always wanted to do in this book, but the publisher didn't want to have anything to do with it. So I brought that out as an ebook, and I'm going to bring out the paperback version of it. It's the same story. I didn't really do much there, but I wanted a new cover. And so I've reissued that myself, just self-publish it myself and through Amazon. And I like that cover so much better. But anyway, the other covers I've been pretty happy with, by and large. Either some I've redone, like my Ruby Dark books they were originally published by St. Martin's Press, which is a big New York publisher, but the cover they had, they were the more traditional small paperbacks. These are trade paperback size, and I hated the covers they did. And like many authors, we often don't like our covers. So I eventually, they were out of print, and I reissued them. And so I did my own covers with Ruby Dark on the cover. And the big dive was that I published. It didn't have. Never went through a traditional publisher. So this cover was. I work with a cover designer, and we came up. I get a lot of reflection from our evening sun. So we worked on this, and of course, I've got to. You can obviously glance at it and realize it's an old police car. So we're establishing time. So
I have that book.
I really enjoyed it. Is that your
do.
listeners won't know, but is that the one you bought when we met
Yes.
years ago? I
Yes.
didn't know what you bought.
Yes, that was the one that I bought. You signed it for me.
Oh, I'm happy
Yes,
to
he
sign
did. He signed it. He signed it.
what authors do. We're happy to sign books. Anybody
I'm
wants
like,
to buy our
"Got
books,
it."
we're happy to sign them.
It's like, I bought the book, sign it.
You know, when we first talked about having you on the show, that was the first thing she told. She's like, I have this book, and he even signed it for me.
You've never gone to a book signing for an author? It's come through town or something like that? I mean,
I've been to one.
have you been to one?
I've been to one.
Who's that?
For Reeni and Ashley. She wrote a book called The Ice Cradle. She's a really well-known medium in the Cleveland, Akron area of Ohio.
Okay.
And she wrote a fiction book called The Ice Cradle. And I went and I had her sign. But I mean, it's a cool experience to be able to sit with an author and kind of pick their brain about how they come up with these ideas and what they think about their books and things like that. So when Reeni wanted you on the show, I was super excited.
Well, even us authors, I have a lot of writer friends, as you might expect, here in Denver, and I don't buy every one of their books, but I certainly try to get at least some representative books from them, and of course I'm always looking for them to sign. In fact, I have a writer friend who writes horror fiction, which is not an area I don't typically read horror books. And I became aware that he had a book paperback out. I mean, this is decades ago, and somebody had a copy of it, and I said, I don't have that book of yours. So I went online and got a used copy. It was in sort of terrible shape, but I just saw him for lunch the other day, and I said, sign my book. So I mean, we do the same thing. We're fans of other writers. I mean, I've had books signed from James Lee Burke, who's one of my absolute favorite crime writers. He did a book signing. I mean, I'm always happy to get Margaret Cole, who did a great series set on the one of the Indian reservations in Wyoming. I mean, I'm always happy to get signed books from them, and they mean something to me. So just like the rest, we're fans, just like all the other fans.
No, but that's the book that I have. That's the book that it was signed. And I know that my daughter got a book too. You signed that for her.
Oh, did I?
You did. You're like, aren't you a little young? She's like, no, I can read this. Which she could. Leave it to her. But yeah, I mean, like I said, it's been a really long time since I read the book, and I like to read a bunch anyways. So it's kind of like, what book was that? What book was that? Because like me, I have my nose in a book.
Well, we all do. I mean,
I got this side. I got a bunch over here too.
Oh yeah,
It's hard to point when you're not looking.
I have stacks of books, that I bought a bunch of books around Christmas, and I'll be reading those for a while, and so sure.
It's a great way to kind of slip away from reality. I love the true crime books, even the fictional aspect of it, and I do like the horror type of books because it's a good release from reality and what's going on in life. And I don't know why this led me into a question, but
of course it did.
Right. So when you were writing about the corruption in the police department and the things that happened, did you ever have someone kind of put the correlation of what really happened and your book together and reach out?
No, I've not had that happen. But a lot of people, most people probably who buy the book have no awareness of it. I mean, it would have to be somebody who's lived in Denver. I have talked with people who have lived in Denver a long time who actually were around when that broke, the story broke, or especially, if they're older and maybe lived in Denver since they were children, were aware of the events. I mean, it was pretty hard to miss. It was a big scandal, not only in the city, but across the country. But I've never had a police officer come up and say, hey, I read your book and you drew on that, didn't you?
You're getting arrested now.
Yeah.
No.
Well, I think it's cool. I think it's really intriguing having a storyline like that and having that type of plot, and then realizing that it was somewhat of a true event that happened. I just think that's really neat to.
Well, I
have
intentionally put in, particularly in that book, there's author's notes in the back of the book, and I talked about those two things, but I particularly wanted to make people aware that I did draw on a real event, and you take liberties with it, like I changed the time frame and that sort of thing. But I had a couple of pages in the back of the book that talked about that and talked about the camps as well, which most people would know of. That part of it, most people would know, but a lot of people wouldn't know of the scandal if they were younger or just didn't come from the Denver area. So I thought it would be beneficial to let people know. And it's not uncommon for authors to put in author's notes, especially when they've drawn something from reality or from a true historical event or even a more current one. And so, yeah, I hope readers would find that interesting.
I mean, I know I do, because I actually did not know about that scandal until Reeni and I were talking about it beforehand, and I found it absolutely intriguing. So I think that's awesome.
Yeah, it's when you read details about it and say, newspaper articles and the Life magazine stuff is really, it was amazing what went on. I mean, some people were arrested. There was one person I recall he was arrested, let out on bail, and then he was quickly caught robbing another store. I mean, they robbed grocery stores where they get into big safes. And one of them, I think he got arrested out in California, and he had already been released on bond in Denver, and he ended up out in California and got caught out there breaking into some store. So these people really went at it, some more than others. But I mean, they had some pretty good safe crackers, and as I say, some of it was more fringe stuff where it was notorious for 5 squad cars to show up at a burglary that gets reported at maybe an alarm goes off at 3 a.m. someplace in downtown Denver, and they're the ones who arrive. There's no one else there. I remember one case, I think it was a clothing store, and they were just hauling clothes out of the store and throwing them in their cars. And so yeah, it was. It's quite a story when you read the details about it.
So where can someone go and buy your books?
Well, all these books are available on Amazon. So if you go to Amazon and just plug in my name, Bruce W. Most, or one of these titles, you'll find either that book, and of course, my name's there, and you can bring up my name, and you bring up all these books. You won't be able to get I don't have the print version of Ropeburn ready yet. It'll probably be another 3 or 4 weeks. It is available in ebook. All the others are the 2 Ruby Dark books and the 2 Joe Stryker books are available both in ebook and paperback. And you can go to my website. I mean, if somebody really wants to get a signed book, I'll mail it to them. If they want to do that. So just
I knew it.
Just go to brucewmost.com, and you can. It's easy to find my name. My website's there. It's got contact information, that sort of thing. If people, but lots of people are happy to just buy an ebook, and you can get those through Amazon. So, and the other thing I will mention, just to plug myself, if you go to my website, I have a free crime novella. About it's set in New York City, but not connected to any of these books, about a private detective who's hired by a man to prove a murder committed by the guy who hired him.
Right.
And so you can from my website, you can find that, and you can actually just download it. It's free. You can download. It's about a 35,000 word story, half a novel, roughly. And I've got some short stories. I have one short story available that's connected to rope burn. And I have a short story that you kind of call it an origin story about Ruby Dark, about when her husband was first murdered, which is about 10 years before my books take place. So if people go to my website, they can find other material, get on my newsletter if they want, if they're interested in that sort of things.
And we'll post it on our Facebook page as well.
Okay.
There, so that way, everybody can click on the link, and then we can kind of direct them in the point of your Amazon.
I'll say all those books are you can find on Amazon. So.
Yes. And I was actually on Amazon looking earlier, and if anybody types in your name or one of the titles of a book, they have the option to follow, so that anytime something is updated or something new comes out, they'll be notified as well.
Yep.
So if you guys are interested in doing that and following him, you'll be notified anytime something gets released or put back up on Amazon.
Right. And I have a small presence on BookBub. A lot of people buy books through BookBub. I'm on Goodreads. I have Twitter and Instagram, but probably the easiest place to find me is either my website or, as you just mentioned, through Amazon. So,
everybody's tweeting these days. I'm just not tweeting. I just haven't gotten that far yet. I don't even have an Instagram. So.
I'm an Amazon girl, so that's where I always go.
Okay, well, it's I have a, there's a profile. Most authors have kind of a profile there, and that's where we have stuff, and you can follow authors from there. So always happy to have people follow me, and because I'll be bringing out and I just released in February the rope burn book with a new cover, and the paperback will probably is going to be early May. But I have another novel that's finished. It's another standalone, and I will be getting that out later this year. So I will have new material, coming out. I can't tell you exactly when yet, but it will be at some point later this year, either later in the summer or early fall, I hope, something like that. So.
Can you give us a little sneak of what it's going to be about?
I knew she was going to do it. I knew it.
If you say no, I understand. I just figured
no, it's okay. I mean, it's the kind of thing you'd put on the back of the book. I mean, if somebody when it gets out, part of me wants to say, in a way, it's an autobiographical murder mystery in the sense that it's about a man he's written true crime. Actually, he's written a couple of true crime books in the past. And one was semi-successful, and the second one went nowhere. And so, but he's a freelance writer, and he's doing a lot of just writing commercial stuff. And so, a friend of his had committed suicide several weeks prior to the start of the story. And the book opens with the man's widow, the wife, asking him, because he's been an investigative reporter in his earlier days, and he's written these true crime books. So she says, I think my husband did not kill himself. I think he was murdered. I want you to investigate it, which he's very reluctant for doing. He really believes it's suicide. It's been officially done that. Plus, in the title of the book called No Time for Murder, he has no time for murder. He's a busy family man running all over the place. But as you would expect, he gets deeper and deeper, into the story, and we have new murders on the scene and that sort of thing. So it borrows from my freelance career. I can't say I've ever investigated a real murder, and I've never written a true crime book. But anyway, is that enough for you?
Yes.
Yeah.
It has me intrigued enough that I want to read it.
Okay.
So. We're gonna make sure one day he writes a true crime book with
you
our
can
help.
Use the name Ashley anytime you want.
But I do have to wrap it up for the night.
Okay.
But
right.
Thank you so much,
Yes.
Bruce.
Well, I appreciate you inviting me on, and it's always fun to talk to people about writing, and people are interested in crime novels and true crime. And so I really appreciate you and bring me on the show.
And thank you. I
Yes,
mean, we really do appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
But we do have to wrap this up tonight because Nicole Strickland is on next, and little thing. Nicole will be on Secrets Within tomorrow night with me, of course, about Jim Jones. So tune in tomorrow night. But you guys all have a good night, and thank you, Bruce, again.
Thank you so much, Bruce. It was nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Ashley.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.